So I want to welcome these wonderful authors and everyone enjoy. Colette, Lisa, Sarah.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's great to be here. Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for joining me tonight. You're such a legend, and it's such an honor to have you here. I'm such
Thank you. You're making me feel older than I already
no,
am.
and I know. And saying legend always does that, but it really is true. And you're so amazing. So thank you for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. And you have an extraordinary body of work and a wonderful new book. So it's really great to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here with both of you. And Lisa, congratulations on yet another triumph, yet another terrific book. And Sarah, I can only quote Garth and Wayne and say, I'm not worthy.
Oh, please. Colette, you do it. Colette, I want to make sure everybody knows that besides being the book editor for the Tampa Bay Times, Colette edits the Crime Reads newsletter, which comes out, does it come out every day or every week, but very often. And it's just an extraordinary resource for all of us who are addicted to crime fiction.
I wish I did edit that, Sarah, but I don't.
Oh,
I have had things.
Fake news. I'm guilty. I'm sorry.
That's fine. And you know, from your lips to the goddess's ears. But I have written things for Crime Reads, but I don't edit it. I have enough to do editing, you know, the book pages of my newspaper and the other things I do. But you know, maybe that'll be next.
Definitely. Why not? In your spare time.
In my spare time, exactly. Lisa, let's talk about Confessions from the 745. I got the time right. I told Lisa the other day, I kept wanting to call this book Confessions on the 715. I don't know why.
You must have like a commute somewhere in your like ancient history where you had to like catch the 715.
The 715, yeah. But it's terrific. You are so good at this, and you just sort of keep getting better.
Oh,
and this one, you and I have talked before about your process, how you write, and readers always want to know this. You know, how do you plan? How do you know what you're doing beforehand? And you've said that you're not a plot outline, note cards on the wall, spreadsheet kind of writer, that you start in a certain place with a character or a situation, and then you write in order to find out what's going to happen. And in this book, the plot is really dependent on things being concealed and then revealed at critical times. And it sort of works like, a Swiss watch. And I wonder, given that the way you usually write is, without a kind of outline, when you write a book like this that's so dependent on timing and suspense, do you have to go back and reverse engineer, or does it just flow from your brain with all of that stuff in place?
Yeah, every novel starts with character voice. And there might be a seed or a germ, could be anything, a news story. In this case, it was an idea that I had like sort of kicking around my head for a while, which is the idea that you can't con an honest man. So that was the idea that I had kicking around in my head, and I brought it up at a crime fiction panel, and one of my author pals said, I don't know, that sounds a little bit like victim blaming to me. And I thought, that's true. And, it's also too simplistic, right? Too much like, nothing in the human psyche is ever easy or simple. And so I, started doing some research into the, into the psychology of the con artist and the psychology of the con. And in my research, I kind of came up with a more comfortable thought, and that was, you can't con somebody who doesn't want something, and everybody wants something. And the con artist is very, very good at knowing what that is, even before you yourself know. And so with that thought in my head, you know, then I start to hear the character voice. In this case, it was Pearl first, and then Selena. And even with this, which is incredibly layered, and you know, some of the characters have, you know, multiple identities until. And so even with that idea, you know, and all those layers, it's still presented to me in very much the same way as every other novel. And it was also very much so like I was writing it because I wanted to know what was going to happen. And I discover these characters in a very similar way to the way my reader does. And that has not changed sort of ever, even though I'm positive that there's an easier way to write a novel. I'm sure it's much easier to outline it, or maybe not, and then sort of, you know, go back or go back and reverse engineer, as you say. But in this case, you know, the scaffolding of the novel, even though in editorial it does change, you know, quite a bit, it wasn't in the first draft that it changed. You know, the characters evolve for me on the page much in the way that they evolve for anybody who's reading it. And then of course, you know, there's the editorial process where you take that original draft, that first draft, and hopefully that's the best. You know, when I turn it into my editor, I know for a fact that that's the best I can do, right? Like, it's not the best book that was ever written, but it's the best book that I could write at that moment. And then there's a whole other creative and collaborative process that, you know, brings about the second and third and the fourth draft of the book until we get to a point where, you know, everything is working, not just for me. It's not just about me, even though it sure seems like it sometimes. It's not just about me. It's about the reader always.
You know, I work in much the same way that you do, Lisa, but it sounds as though, well, I have to ask you, because I don't outline. I can't, because until I have characters in motion, I don't know whether the
Exactly.
storyline is working.
Right.
But I'm often writing down rabbit holes that I have to back out of and start over again. The book that I'm working on now, I'm on page 47 for the 5th time. And I'm just wondering whether once you get going, you find that you've gone down a wrong path, or whether you also have to back and fill before you get that first draft that's as good as you can make it.
I feel like, I mean, it's not so much that there aren't, for me, that many rabbit holes that I go down and then have to back myself out of. For me, it's almost like the manuscript will, like, Jennifer McMahon and I talked about this, it'll kick me out in a way. So like, I'm doing my thing, I'm hearing my voices, I'm writing, you know, it's evolving on the page, it's a daily process, it's an early process, like in my dream brain still. And then, you know, I kind of hit like a stone, I'll hit like a stone wall. Either it's my own ignorance, or I'm just not sure where the next foothold in the story is. And so I've always really thought of it as like a very organic process where there's an ebb and a flow. And so when I'm in the flow, that's great. I can't keep the pages from coming. But when the ebb hits, that is also part of the process. So a lot of times I'll just stop and do anything that nourishes me. So that might be exercising, or cooking, or doing anything that uses my brain somewhat, but just not that part of the brain. Like, it just switches off to something else for a little while. And when I'm in that kind of emptier space, that blank space, very often I hear the next thing. And
how fabulous, how fortunate for you. I need to get your inner voice talking to me.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's a little bit about just being willing to stop when you don't have that, like, I need to have that like high energy vibration in order to get to the next stop, into the next like foothold in the story, like the next piece that works. And so I feel like I just have, you know, sort of like a respect for my subconscious. Like, if my subconscious is like, no, just go for a walk, then I have to.
You know, it's really hard to know sometimes whether you've reached a dead end that you have to leave, or whether it's just a dip in the road. Tony Hillerman used to say that he wrote to the end of the headlights in the road, and then he had to stop and point them again and see where the road lay.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense to me.
For both of you, in this book, Lisa, in your book, I found characters, as they were supposed to, surprising me. Like, what? She what? You know, that's who that is? And
I
Sarah,
know. I thought it was extraordinary, the identities, and I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to
you
spoil
want
it
to
for people who haven't read it. But it's quite an achievement.
it is. And Sarah, I've certainly had characters in your book surprise me too. Do your characters surprise you?
Me or Sarah or both of you?
Both.
Well, I think that mine. It's when I put them in motion and see what happens with the story. In Deadland, the novel that I published a few months ago, there's a character who I had meant to have very different than what he turned out to be. He was meant to be just a sort of a loner who walked the lakefront and knew all of the homeless people in the park. And he ended up 20 years younger, angry, with a big backstory, as the son of immigrants in the Kansas prairies. And it wasn't until I was trying to make the story come together that his role changed as dramatically as it did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always surprised by my characters. Some of them are more surprising than others. I can think of a few where, I just sort of, I have these like 3 a.m. wake ups, which is part of the problem of writing the way I write. So like I think things get worked out in my subconscious, and I'll wake up at like 3 a.m. and be like, oh, that's it, right? So there's always like all these surprises for me. And I always think about Lana Granger from In the Blood, and the only thing I knew when I started writing about her was that that she was a liar, and that she would start off the book as one thing, and by the end of the book that she would be something else. And so that's all I knew about her, that I had this sense of her as being like very cocooned, like she was sort of wrapped up. And so that was the truth for that book. And then of course in Confessions there's lots of layers to the characters, and people are not only lying to each other, they're also lying to themselves in very significant ways. And so there were always I felt very much that I was kind of just peeling back layer after layer in the writing of the novel.
Yeah. Sarah, we're kind of talking about how both of you write without a plan, an outline, but the new book, Love and Other Crimes, is a short story collection. And they're short stories that you've written at different times. You didn't sit down and write them all at once. And I wonder, is that process different for a short story when because they're compact, because the plot is, less involved? Do you have a sort of a more of an overview of where a short story is going to go? Or is that just as much of an adventure as a novel?
In some ways, it's a better adventure because I'm doing it on a smaller canvas, and I don't have to create quite so much. But there's one story in this collection in particular, Baptism by Fire, that takes place in Kansas in the 1920s. It was something that Larry Block commissioned for a collection he was doing called From Sea to Stormy Sea, where we were each given a painting to write a short story about.
Right.
And until I reached sort of the 2/3 point of the story, it took that long for me to see what would have to happen with the characters. And then it became possible to end it. I grew up in Kansas. I live in Chicago now, but I grew up in Kansas. And the first college for Indian nations in this country is in the town that I grew up in, Haskell Institute. And it was very much founded as a racist kind of school to make Indians conform to European norms. And so my story is set in the 1920s against the backdrop of the founding of that school, and things that I had imagined just could not be done with the attitudes of that era. And thinking it through and getting to that point made me write a much better story than it would have if I had plotted it out and just done it by the numbers from what I was imagining to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really wrenching story, really powerful story. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, just about your book, your short stories, which is so fantastic and rich and layered, and just the character depth is so just inspirational. And I thought it was also so cool that anybody who reads this book is going to get a very special, like, sort of early look at, you know, your beloved, like, longtime character. So it seems like almost like the perfect place to, you know, I mean, I can't imagine anybody doesn't, you know, isn't familiar with your work, but if they weren't, it seems like almost the perfect place to start, because you get this, like, really very super cool window into a character that so many people just adore, and that's such
Well,
a, you
thank
know,
you.
such a front runner, you know, in the you know, I hate the word genre, but, you know, in the writing, it's such a front runner. So I thought that was, like, just a very special treat for your readers, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I did write one story new for the collection, Love and Other Crimes, and it's more humorous than many of them. And every time I send VI back to her roots, where the old steel mills used to be on the southeast side of Chicago, I just feel my writing flows more easily, that the characters are richer, even though she grew up in this real kind of, I don't want to say melting pot, but culture clash neighborhood of successive waves of immigrants. And I grew up in the country going to a 2-room school. It's still where I feel at home when I start writing it. It was just very fun to create one of her old neighborhood families and put them through their paces.
Yeah, that's a funny story.
I love that.
Yeah. The grudges, you know, I like the story it's like a 40-year-old grudge, you know, that woman brings to VI that she's still working out. That's one thing I wanted to ask you about is setting in your books. My late husband was a huge fan of yours. We both started reading your books in the 80s, and he had been, when he was young in the 80s, he worked at a newspaper on the south side of Chicago. And
Oh, really? Which one?
Oh,
The Economist?
no.
Oh, the Calumet paper. Okay.
Yeah. And they were like, you know, some of his glory days.
Right.
And he loved VI as a character, but he also loved your evocation of Chicago. He always loved the way that you wrote about Chicago. So I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about the importance of setting in the books. You know, Warshawski's a great character, but she's kind of grows out of that setting, like, you know, Marlowe grows out of Chandler's Los Angeles and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Chicago is the city where I really came of age. I came here when I was 19 to do community service in the civil rights movement. It was the summer that Martin Luther King came to Chicago to help light a fire under the city council, which was not responding to the local civil rights leadership's demands for open housing and open employment. And I worked probably for the best boss I ever worked for. It was the minister at the church that I was assigned to. He had us so involved in the city. We were running a day camp for kids 6 to 11 in a mostly Polish, Lithuanian, Catholic neighborhood. And our job was soft propaganda to teach them a different view of diversity than throwing rocks across the segregated street, Ashland Avenue. So Tom Phillips sending us everywhere with our kids, without our kids going to local white council meetings, going to city council meetings, going to civil rights meetings. The city just got in my blood in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And we would take these kids on the L. Many of them had never been out of their neighborhood. And we'd bring them back and say, okay, what did you see? And we were expecting like the tall buildings or something. No, they saw things up close. A fox that was running along the L tracks, a drunk passed out on a rooftop. And then I was writing very privately in those days. I wasn't imagining writing for publication, but it changed me as a writer because it made me aware that it's that little detail in the landscape that brings a landscape to life. So I think it was the combination of the kids, the energy of those times, the hope that we had, the change that we thought was possible in this massive city, so different from anything I had experienced. And so Chicago to me is real and personal. And even today with all its problems, I can't imagine living anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the many things that make your book so special, you know, is that.
But I wanted to ask, speaking of setting, I wanted to ask Lisa, the 745, that's set in the New York area, but don't you live in Florida? So tell me, I was curious about that setting.
Well, it's funny, as you were talking about Chicago, I mean, that is kind of the way I feel about New York. I, as a kid, I grew up all over. My dad, who's on here, we traveled for his job. He worked for Exxon, and we were in the Netherlands and the UK, and then finally in New Jersey. But I've had this kind of lifelong love affair with New York City, and I went to NYU and then to the New School, and then I worked in publishing for for the next sort of almost 15 years. And I feel that that city. It's when I close my eyes, I can hear it and smell it, and and I'm there, and so it does come back again and again in the work. Florida, Colette and I have talked about this quite a bit. Florida has started to metabolize itself onto the page. It's taken a long time for it to start to find its way into the work. But New York City, and then there's also my fictional town, the Hollows, right, which my brother will swear up and down that it's Long Valley, New Jersey, the place where he and I went to middle school and high school, and he was there longer than I. But it's not. But of course, it's that northern sort of area that's close to the city, but is far enough away that it might as well be on the moon in some ways. And so those are the region, those are the areas that, that I feel. And it's like you say, when I'm back there, like on the page, I feel the flow and the energy of that place and those places, and my love, in some cases, my love for that place, and also my like sort of frustration with the place or whatever, like it kind of all finds its way onto the page. And so now I'm starting to, Florida is starting to find its way into the work a little bit more, but I think I'm always like sort of in my heart, that New York and that, that tri-state area is really like my home. It's like my heart's home in a lot of ways.
Lisa, you had said a little while ago that one thing you really wanted to have Sara talk about, and I would love to hear her talk about this too, is the founding of Sisters in Crime. Was there at the beginning, the inception of that organization, and at a time when it was a bold move to start an organization for women writing crime fiction.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds like, like Sara has an activist's heart,
Mm-hmm.
it does
kind of hide it.
Do you?
Vote sign.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about that. And I know that, for many years, maybe even still at this time, like there's this kind of sense of like crime, thriller, mystery as being like sort of a little bit of a boys club. Although I would argue to say that, many of the best people writing crime fiction are women, and certainly some of the luminaries like yourself are women in the crime fiction genre. And I'm just interested in what was that moment like for you when you decided, what, we need our own advocate group, we need our own voice, our own.
Well, it was not exactly like that. It came out organically from issues that a lot of women were facing. So when Sue Grafton and I published our first books in the same year, 1982, and we both got very strong review attention. And so I wasn't aware of the way in which most women crime writers were being ignored by review outlets. In hindsight, it seemed to me that it was because Sue and I were doing something that was perceived as being more male. We had hard-boiled private eyes, and that's a more masculine part of the genre, even though in many ways we were upending the conventions of the genre. So in 1986, in March of 1986, Hunter College hosted the first ever symposium on women crime writers, women in the mystery. And that was when I started hearing from women about how very difficult it was to get review attention. And what that means is that libraries don't know you exist, bookstores don't know you exist, and so you have a very short publishing history. You get one book published, but then you die. So I started reaching out to women that I met at the conference to hear what some of the issues they were facing were. And then at the BoucherCon, which for those who don't know it, there are 1 million mystery conferences. In non-COVID times, you could spend every week of your life at a different conference somewhere in the English-speaking world. But the BoucherCon is the grandmommy, granddaddy of them all, and the one that most of us think is the most important. So that October at the BoucherCon in Baltimore, I sent a letter to the 26 women I'd been communicating with saying, is there enough interest in addressing some of these inequities to form an organization? If there is, let's meet, let's have breakfast, let's talk about how to go forward. If there's not, let's stop whining and just go our separate ways. As the great Flo Kennedy used to say, don't agonize, organize. So that was the start of it, and there was tremendous enthusiasm for it. A year later, there were 100 of us. We formed a formal organization, called it Sisters in Crime, and went on from there. But the first and most important thing that we did, and is still important, was our book review project. Because what we found, and thanks to the Drood Review and Jim, whose last name I'm blanking on, sorry, Huang from the Drood Review gave us a list of the 1,000 crime novels that had been published in 1986. We went through, and in those days, no internet, it was handwork, going through every major newspaper and journal to see how many of those books had been reviewed. And what we found was, adjusting for publication numbers, a book by a man was 7 times more likely to be reviewed than a book by a woman, which meant that, well, we thought, maybe men write twice as well as we do, but we don't think they write 7 times as well as we do. So we started writing to all these review outlets. And I have to say that most of them just womaned up and realized that they had male reviewers. They weren't paying attention to books by women. But we also found that as soon as we stopped monitoring them, they just went back to their tired old ways. And then the organization has grown. It's doing a tremendous amount, supports libraries. It's one of the first literary organizations to really take the challenge of the lack of voices of color seriously, and to have scholarships for women writers of color so that they can take time off from their day jobs and write. So it's expanded to be, I mean, it's extraordinary to me. I stopped being active in it a long time ago. The younger women who are running it are just dynamos. Lori Raider Day, the outgoing president, kudos to her. She was phenomenal, and they all are. So it's something I just feel enormously proud of having been part of.
Such a great thing.
Great. I love a story with a happy ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have too many of those these days.
No, we
so let's
don't.
rejoice in the ones we do.
Yep, we don't. Lisa, I want to ask you another question, and then I think we'll probably be about to the time of opening it up for our audience to ask questions, and I think they're asking a lot. But I know that you are a monster for research, that you probably like researching your books almost as much as you like writing them. Even though you wing it when you're actually writing, you start with a kind of solid body of research. We talked the other day, and the subject came up of Zoom fatigue, where if you're doing this kind of an event and you're on the screen with a bunch of people, when you're done, you're tired.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really make sense because it's not physical. You're just sitting in front of your computer, but you feel sort of exhausted. And I should have anticipated this, but you had already researched that.
Of course.
And you knew exactly why that happens. And so first of all, can you just briefly explain that? Because I think it's fascinating. And then can you talk about what kind of research you did for Confessions on the 745?
Yeah, absolutely. My research is kind of, for every book, it's kind of ongoing. It's my whole life is sort of research to a certain degree, and I'm sort of an information junkie, so I'm always like taking in, as much information as I can. Books, documentaries, podcasts. It's just kind of the way my brain works. It's just like thirsty, right? It just wants knowledge. And so I do that a lot just in general. And um, there are things that just like tend to kind of fascinate me. So while the Zoom thing started to fascinate me because, sort of starting the pandemic, we kind of all pivoted to kind of be online all the time. And I was, really aware of this new type of fatigue that I would feel at the end of the day of being on Zoom and having various meetings, and even like just my my chats with friends that I've recorded and sort of put out there. And I was like, it's not normal. Like, it's not a normal feeling. I'm like, and there must be something. And then my daughter was also saying, I'm so tired, because she had switched to virtual, she had switched to online learning. So I started doing this research, and I realized that from my reading that, your brain kind of switches into overdrive when you're on an event like this, especially when you can see many, many different people. And because, most people, most women especially, are always like you're always looking at faces. You always you're reading expressions, and you're looking for, feedback. And, it's something that is a very common thing. And when we're together in a room, it's all very, it's all very natural. We touch each other, we laugh, you hear my voice, you see my eyes, you are attuned to my micro expressions, even if you don't know that you are. But on Zoom, all that is gone, especially on a group Zoom. You might have somebody messing around with their camera, you might have somebody just kind of sitting there like that, and you're like looking at them like, looking for some kind of feedback, but you're not going to get it because they're not reacting to you necessarily, and they're not reacting in the time. So it's more than anything else, it's like a kind of a brain fatigue. So your brain is just tired after trying to figure it out so hard for like an hour or however long, and you may not even be aware of it. It's not like a thought thing. It's not like you're thinking, oh, this is horrible, or oh, I'm bored, or it's nothing like that. It's just that your brain gets tired from just not being able to read the cues that you're used to being able to read. So these are the kind of thing, and that's the kind of thing that'll happen for me. Like that piece of information will probably find its way into a novel or a story or something at that point. I have no idea where, but this is why I take in so much information, because I just don't, it's going to inform my fiction somehow. So for Confessions on the 745, I had two books that were very important to my research. And one of them was The Confidence Game by Maria Konnikova, which is a brilliantly written book about the psychology of the confidence artist and the psychology of the con, and how how it works, and why people most people feel they would never be able to fall for a con. Like, most people feel that way. I'm too smart, I'm not, nobody could ever pull one over on me. But the fact is, the more sure you are that you're not going to be the victim of a confidence game, the more likely you are to be one. And that everybody is vulnerable because everybody wants something, and the con artist is very, very good at figuring out what that thing is. And
I think that's a really interesting take on cons and con artists, because I look back, as many of you know, I lost my husband of 45 years a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. But I would say he was the best person I've ever known. He was a gentle and generous hearted person, and he was often conned, not because he wanted something,
right,
but because his level
lovely.
of empathy and his concern for the underdog was so acute that that even the most obvious person on the street spinning a story, and I'd be grabbing him and saying, Courtney, I think we're done here. But he'd say, no, her daughter really is in labor and needs taxi fare to get to a hospital 20 miles away from here.
Yeah, and she talks about that a little bit in the book as well, that, it's often the most empathetic and open-hearted people that are the most, that are the most prey to, to this type of con. And another book that was very, very important in the research was a book called Lie Spotting by Pamela Meyer. And I've been interested in, lies and lying. And for a long time, I read a book a while back called What Every Body is Saying by a man named Joe Navarro. And it was all about the body tells that, interrogators watch for. It's not like a prescription, like you can't tell somebody's lying because they look up and to the right or whatever, but like you can establish a baseline for people, and that there's these very certain gestures and body movements and limbic responses of the brain that make muscles in the face twitch that you can become attuned to. But she took it a little bit even further than that into, the idea of like that, her, one of her main theses is that everybody lies, and people lie all the time, and they're basically lying all day. You lie to yourself, you lie to the people around you, you maybe embellish a fact, or maybe you try not to hurt somebody's feelings, so you tell them they look nice when they don't, like all these things. And it's just almost like a reflexive, almost like a survival mechanism that people just kind of, they lie to themselves, to each other, and it's not always for bad reasons. So that was another big sort of research point for me, because, in Confessions on 745, everybody's lying. They're lying to themselves, they're lying to each other, and that's just what's happening.
All right, let me ask both of you one more quick question, and then we can turn it over to the audience. But what are you working on next? What's your next book?
Colette, I'm never going to talk about the next book.
No. I know.
The next thing that'll come out after Confessions is a short story in the MWA anthology that was edited by Michael Carita. Mm-hmm. And that is that's called a 6-letter word for neighbor. And that'll be coming out in April. And
I'm sorry, a 6-letter word for what?
For neighbor.
Oh, neighbor. Okay.
And I'm working on the editorial. I'm in the editorial phase on my next novel, which will publish in the fall of 2021. And stay tuned.
Okay, Sara, what are you working on next, or are you willing to talk about what you're working on?
Well, I have to say, I'm always so jealous of writers like Lisa who just keep going. The political situation and the COVID crisis have gotten me torqued at such a level of anxiety that I'm having trouble reading, writing, eating, sleeping. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to write a novel. I'm under contract for a novel in my series that, as I said earlier, I'm on page 42 for the 5th time. My brain is not working. And I can write like mad when I have something to say, but right now the story, I know what the story is, but I just can't make it happen. Touch wood, this 5th time will move me forward, and I'll get to page 50.
Yes. Well, I bet you will. I bet you will.
You will. I mean, this is happening to a lot of people now, yes. Too. I mean, it's just, it's just the time. It's really hard to be creative in a time like this, but
and to focus. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. We could all use some help with that. Let's hope we get some. Yeah. Laura, are we ready to take some questions from the audience?
I think Laura is muted. She's muted. Yeah.
She is.
Yep.
She'll unmute. There you are.
I am unmuted now. I apologize.
Yay. There's Oline.
All right.
Hi.
And we've got lots of questions and lots of participation. It's been fantastic. So yeah, I'm going to start kind of right at the top. Let me go. Sorry.
I see a lot of
this is how much there is. This question is from Maggie. So since both of you use the real setting of the world to stimulate your process, has the quarantine had an impact? And have you used your previous travel ephemera to augment or not?
Well, since my books are set in Chicago, I don't need to augment them with recent travel. Although I went to Spain in February, right before the shutdown. I went to look at an archaeological dig, which was just fascinating. V.I. Warshawski currently is involved with an archaeologist at the Oriental Institute in Chicago, and I've had him switch from his work in Iraq and Syria, where he had to leave anyway, to working on this Phoenician dig on the Mediterranean coast in Spain. And I am hoping that post-COVID that VI will get there and that there will be some adventure in the old Phoenician 2,500-year-old settlement there.
I feel like, I'm sure it will find its way into the work. I have no idea how it will metabolize on the page. The book that I have been writing this entire year and the one I'm editing now, it was already, it already had some themes that were relevant to some of the things that are going on now. And the pandemic and everything else that's going on certainly deepened those themes. But as how it will turn up on the page in the future, I don't know. I imagine it will. I know some people just would like to forget that it ever happened. But I think it's going to be a while before we can do that. So I don't know. It has to be like an organic evolution to the page. It wouldn't be something that I would purposely write about.
On a different note, because I'm just going down the line so I don't lose track. When you published your first book, did you do something special to celebrate? Both of you. Yeah.
When did you publish your first book, Lisa?
My first book was published in 2002, and it was published under my maiden name, Lisa Michonne. Hi, Mom and Dad. My parents are here, and I was published in 2002. And I have to say that that moment was for me. It was just it was a total dream come true. I have been a writer all my life. I never wanted to be or do anything else, and every step I took in my life was in some way a step towards that thing, and there was a time in my life where I was, working very hard at a job and had personal things going on in my life, and I didn't write as much as I should have. But once I got serious about it and finished my first novel, that was the novel that eventually became my first published novel. And I have to say that it was just it was a total dream come true. And to be honest, this is book 18, and every single time I have that same feeling of joy and gratitude that I've been able to make my living doing this thing that I love to do. And so every single time is a celebration, and I think it always will be.
Like Lisa, I've been writing my whole life, but I never imagined myself writing for publication. I grew up in a time and place where women were, and in a family where women weren't expected to be in the public sphere in any way unless they were teachers, secretaries, or nurses. We used to call it TNS. So it was a long time before I realized that I had a public voice as well as a very private voice. And there were other things I wanted to do. I used to imagine that I would dance with the Bolshoi, even though I used to be mocked terribly in my ballet classes for my clumsiness. I still, in my dreams, there I was, along with Pavlova. But when I published my first book, there is no thrill greater than those first author copies. I mean, it's always exciting to publish a book, but the first one, and they arrived, the publication date was January, the books arrived 2 days before Christmas. And I have a picture on my website, saraparetsky.com, of me with my first golden retriever. My husband stacked the books around us in front of the Christmas tree. And there we are in the middle of Indemnity Only, and both of us happy as clams. In 1985 or 86, Doubleday published a book called Family Portraits, and they asked a bunch of writers, most of them extremely famous, and I had published 2 books and nobody knew my name, to write about the family member who most influenced them in becoming a published writer. And I wrote about my dog Capo. she lay next to me. I worked full time in the insurance industry. I was writing the way one does, 5 in the morning, 10 at night, weekends. And she just stayed with me all through that first book. When I get stuck, she would look up at me with those amber golden retriever eyes saying, "You can do it, Sarah, you can do it." So I wrote about Capo and how she helped me get published, and Doubleday said, "We will not publish an essay about a dog." So I ended up with a cousin, but not nearly as big an influence as my dog.
I think you're muted.
Lisa, Laura,
I
you're
see
muted
it. I
again.
see. My dog was barking, so I had to mute myself.
Oh,
She liked that story.
She liked the story. She wanted to be heard. She was
Yes.
mad that she wasn't on
wants to
the
be
screen.
known. Exactly.
The pets, they really want attention.
They do. They do.
I have a question from Craig Pittman, who we've hosted several times before as well. He's a local author. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
What are some, and it's a great question, what are some new female crime writers that you've been reading?
Great question. Well, I just finished a book by Jilly McMillan, To Tell You the Truth, and she's a British author, and she's extremely talented. And her book features one of my favorite characters, which is an imaginary friend. I do love a good imaginary friend, and she's just a really stellar writer, and so she's, I wouldn't necessarily say that she's new, but she's certainly one that I enjoy. Jennifer Hillier, her book Little Secrets is another one of my favorites. And then, of course, I just have like some longtime favorites, like Sarah and like Laura Lippman, and Megan Abbott is another extreme talent. Kate Atkinson is another favorite. Some of these people have been writing for a long time, but it's definitely a rich area of female crime writers, both women that are just starting out, or sort of early in their career, and people who've been writing for a long time.
We have a writer in Chicago, Nancy Johnson, who will be publishing her first book with Morrow in January. And Erin Mitchell, are you still there? Can you help me with the title? I'm drawing a blank on it. I think it's called The Good Lie, A Necessary Lie. Anyway, it's a wonderful book that kind of brings together a lot of the issues around racial justice that we're all grappling with. And it's partly a love story, The Kindest Lie, thank you. It's a love story, it's a murder mystery, it's a long buried family secrets. I'm just very excited that I got a preview of this book and had a chance to comment on it. There are a couple of writers, they're not new at all, but Lori Rader Day, another Chicago writer who does books sort of similar to what Lisa does, the ones that kind of people I saw in the chat room, people were saying, "Lisa, will this book keep me awake at night?" It will. Don't read this book after 6 p.m.
Stay awake all night reading it.
Lori Rader Day writes similarly very edge of the seat books. The Scottish writer Denise Mina, wonderful writer, just published a new book. And I have a very beloved English friend, Liza Cody, who is one of the best, least recognized writers in the form. She's been publishing as long as I have, and it makes me crazy that nobody knows her name. She wrote a book called Bucket Nut that, if you have not read that book, you should read that book. It is an amazing tour de force about a woman wrestler who has no kind of ability to separate, and she just has no self-awareness. She's big, sloppy. She is the antithesis of Lisbeth Salander, and she has a huge female body instead of looking like a little boy as Salander does. By the end of Bucket Nut, you are weeping with empathy for this character. I think it's one of the greatest underread, undervalued books of the 20th century.
Okay. the next question is, which I think is kind of a good fun thing, from Beth Schatzberg. Where do you both feel the best place to write for inspiration when delving into your writing?
I'm sort of, I always think of myself as kind of an extreme introvert, which I know every time I say that, people laugh at me because it doesn't seem like I am, but my friends know that it's true. And so, I have an office in my home. Like, so we moved a few years ago. And so this is the first time, like sort of in my, grown up life that I've had a room that's completely mine. And it's a loft on the top floor of our house. And that is the place where I go to write. I try to make it, when I'm not on Zoom, I try to make it a space where there's no, I don't log online onto the internet for any reason, news, social media. I try to keep that separate from my desktop and try to create a space that is just conducive to creativity and to devoting myself to whatever it is I'm working on. And because it's up high, I walk up a couple flights of stairs, and I feel like it's kind of in that action, it like sets my intention that I'm going to work, I'm going to write. And that's my favorite place to write. And it's sort of my escape hatch from the world. The page is definitely my escape hatch. It's where I go to metabolize, things that are bothering me, things that I'm trying to figure out, maybe what's even happening in the world. So I definitely consider this space my creative space, and that's where I go.
Because I'm a nervous, anxious person, it's very hard for me to sit still. Like Lisa, I have my own space. We live in an old Victorian house on Chicago's South Side. And many years ago, my husband and I took an unfinished attic and turned it into my office. Yeah. But I'm up and down those 3 flights of stairs 20 times a day, just trying to settle down and get centered. Melville talked about needing to be in the quiet grass growing place in order to write, and how hard it was to get access to that green grass growing place. Yeah. And when I need to be there, the Chicago lakefront, I'm very fortunate that I'm a 10-minute walk from Lake Michigan. Yeah. Walking that lakefront, especially this time of year with the colors on the water and then the trees, really does help center me and bring me down. And a lot of times just being in motion will help me figure out where I need to be next with my writing. I don't go there thinking, I go there just walking, but the walking helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a fun question, which I think we had talked about a little bit before. What are both of you drinking? It's from Wine to everyone. I want to know what Lisa and Sara are drinking. And we can take this time to just say hello to everyone. We can do an official toast to Lisa, Colette, and Sara.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody,
Cheers.
for being here. Yay.
Congratulations, ladies, and thank you for keeping us up at night.
Thank you. It's our job and our pleasure. Well, Sara, you go first because your cocktail, we talked about it.
My cocktail was created for me.
Yeah.
It's an interesting phenomenon, I think, that people, the Gen X generation, have become addicted to making cocktails, inventing them, mixologists.
That's so true. Right.
I was at a cocktail party the other night run for a not-for-profit organization I belong to. It was a reward to donors. And I was just sitting there watching all of the 40-somethings. They were all fighting over, when do you froth the egg white? And I was like, oh, froth the egg white. I didn't know you used an egg white. But for my 70th birthday, a good friend, a very beloved friend whose husband is one of these dedicated cocktail makers, he invented a cocktail for me. It's called in honor of the Edith Piaf song, Je regrette rien, and I'm sorry, my French is abominable, but I regret nothing in all of my 70 years. Unlike my normal persona, which is filled with endless regrets. And it's bourbon, which I don't usually drink, but it's mixed with rhubarb bitters, lemon juice, and a simple syrup. And because it was created just for me, I don't feel like I can reveal the
No, you
proportions
shouldn't.
online, but those are the ingredients. And anyway, it's very fun to have my own cocktail.
That's wonderful. I'm drinking a Cosmopolitan, which is like my forever favorite cocktail, and it's just, you know, it always reminds me of New York, you know, so whenever I have it, I'm back in Manhattan a little bit.
All right, with that, I think it almost wraps it up perfectly at 7:31. So it was the perfect question to end on. We will share and post the video on Facebook. So for everyone who wanted to go back and listen and find some answers, we'll send up a follow-up email, and you can also re-watch the video again on Facebook. So
Laura, Colette, thank you so much. Lisa, tremendous congratulations.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Laura and Colette. You guys are, and Katie, yes, behind the scenes, doing all the important stuff, making sure everything works. And all my friends, I see you, Mom and Dad, and everyone. Thank you for being here. It means the world to me. You guys are amazing.
Thanks to all of you. It was a delight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hope to see the store in person one of these days.
Oh, I hope so too, Sarah. I'd love to have you down. We have some Sisters in Crime meetings that will start taking place in 2021. So I'm very excited about that.
It's a beautiful store. It's a beautiful store. It really is.
And now we know we can do a live event, but also post-COVID, we can do live, but be virtual around the world too. Because I love being able to have people from everywhere that you would not be able to reach. It's the one good thing about COVID events is that you can see so many people all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really great. It's such a nice thing. I mean, I know it's like difficult because it's, you know, you still want to connect in that, you know, physical way, to touch and all that, but there's a lot of really really important connections that are happening this way as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of smiling faces still out there.
Yay. Thanks, Roxanne. Signing off.
All right, nice, very nice.
That's my dad. He feels like
you got dad's approval.
Okay, thanks a lot, Colette. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you,
wonderful evening.
Thanks so much.
Interesting evening.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Colette.
Bye.
Good night.
Hello.
Hello, are you still there?
I am still there. Is it my responsibility to
Nope, I'm going to end it. Once everyone goes, I'll go ahead and end it. So that's
got it. Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Hi, so I have a question.
It's Masuma. I really enjoyed it. It was lovely to, hear all that and know all those lovely authors. Can I get an email? I'm actually visually impaired. I really want to look into all those books and if I can get them.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you listen to audiobooks?
On Bard, yes. But otherwise, yeah.
Yes. Are you, is it Catherine Bastache or let me just.
No, it's Masuma Afghan.
Okay, great. Oh, got it. I see. I couldn't find your name there. We are going to send out an email. So you want to have the books that they were talking about?
Yes.
I've got your notes up here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it the books that Sarah and Lisa wrote or the ones that they were talking about?
Actually, all of them, the ones that they wrote and the ones they were talking about.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We will follow up and we'll go ahead and do kind of a we'll go through the video and write down, we'll repost it as well. And then we'll probably send a recap email in a couple of days and just list all the books they talked about.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And always feel free if you want to, you can call us at the bookstore and we can help you out over the phone. So.
Okay. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for doing such a great show. It was lovely.
Thanks for joining. It was wonderful to see it so well. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.